This is a reconstructed image of a teenage girl who had no name. Her identity, a mystery that police believed impossible to solve. That was until 36 years later when a group of amateur internet sleuths finally cracked the case. Thanks to Rocket Money for sponsoring today's video. More about them later. November 9th, 1979. In the rural town of Caledonia, 16-year-old Wesley Clementis was driving with his father, Harry, on their usual route to a local diner for a morning cup of coffee. As they passed through their family's cornfield, Wesley spotted something unusual near the edge of the field. A body, face down, a young girl, clearly deceased. They immediately contacted the police. One of the first officers to arrive on the scene was John York. At first, it looked like it might have been a hit and run, but as they approached the body, it quickly became clear. This wasn't an accident. It was a murder. The girl was fully clothed. She had been shot twice, once in the back of her head and once above her right eye. Investigators believe the wound pattern told a grim story. She didn't turn, and she didn't flinch. Whoever did this took her by surprise. The official cause of death, severe hemorrhaging from both gunshot wounds. Later, during the autopsy, the medical examiner determined that the first shot was fired while she stood at the edge of the cornfield, right by the road. There was blood found at the spot that backed it up. Afterward, she was dragged deeper into the field. That's when the second shot was fired. She was left there, in the middle of the field, as a heavy rainstorm moved through the area that night. Police believe the weapon used was a .38 caliber handgun, based on the wound profile and bullet fragments recovered at the scene. A ballistics team even dug up a bullet buried beneath her body and spent years testing it against hundreds of guns seized in other cases. They compared it to the bullets fired from guns used in crimes as far away as Canada, Europe, and Mexico, but not a single one matched. It became clear this was going to be a tough case from the start. The heavy rainstorm washed away most of the physical evidence, and this wasn't some remote back road. This stretch of Route 20 was well traveled. Dozens of people drove along it every day. To make things worse, her pockets were turned inside out. No wallet, no ID. Whoever did this had done what they could to make it so she wouldn't be identified. With no name to go on, authorities gave her one, Caledonia Jane Doe, or as she'd come to be known, Callie Doe. The investigation began with Officer John York as lead. He started on foot, walking several miles along the road, searching for anything the rain hadn't washed away. York and his team then visited 70 local restaurants, trying to find someone who might have seen her. And at the Lima Diner, they got their first possible lead. A waitress remembered two unfamiliar people coming in around 8:30 p.m. the night before the body was found. A teenage girl and a man who looked around 25 years old. The girl was later confirmed to be Callie Doe, based on what the waitress said she had ordered. The meal matched the contents found in her stomach during autopsy. The man she was with was described as wearing glasses and having dark curly hair. According to the waitress, the girl didn't seem scared or distressed. She was laughing and seemed to be having a good time. A composite sketch of the man was drawn up and distributed to all police stations in the country. As York continued digging, something else stood out to him. The jacket she was wearing. It was red, nylon-lined, made by Autosports Products Incorporated. He tracked the label for weeks, eventually reaching the manufacturer in California. But they had bad news. The company had produced thousands of those coats as a promotional item. There was no way to trace a single sale. It was a dead end. Among her other belongings was a Native American-style necklace, silver beads with 3 small turquoise stones, one shaped like a bird. They thought that it seemed handmade, possibly in the Southwest. She also had 2 keychains attached to the front belt loops of her jeans. One, in the shape of a heart, read, "He who holds the key can open my heart." The other keychain held the actual key that fit the silver heart. Investigators believe that the items could have been bought at any roadside gift shop, maybe a souvenir stand during her travels. Still, they pressed on. They noticed visible tan lines on Callie's upper body and freckles across her shoulders, both unusual for upstate New York in November. It suggested she'd recently come from a much warmer climate. And based on her physical development and acne on her chest and face, they believed she was between 13 and 19 years old. They couldn't identify her, even through dental records. She had no fillings, no restorations, nothing to suggest she'd even had dental care. Police followed up on more than 10,000 leads. Every single one hit a dead end. The girl's fingerprints were sent to FBI headquarters, but they came back with nothing. She wasn't in the system. Several truckers also called in with tips, saying they'd seen a teenage girl traveling alone, hitchhiking rides where she could. One trucker, in particular, swore he saw her the night before the murder, trying to catch a ride to Boston from a nearby truck stop. Then, suddenly, a man came forward claiming responsibility. Henry Lee Lucas, already convicted of 11 murders, said he was the one who killed Callie Doe, alongside his partner, Otis Toole. In 1984, 5 years into his relentless search for the truth, John York flew to Texas to interview Lucas in prison. But York was careful. He knew some serial killers like to confess to crimes they didn't commit, for the attention, for the control, or just for amusement. During the interview, Lucas gave just enough details to sound convincing, but not enough to confirm anything. He was pressed to recall something specific that Callie Doe had been wearing, maybe a piece of jewelry. Lucas claimed she had on a little gold piece with a teardrop at the bottom, but that detail didn't match anything found on the body. He mentioned the name Otis Toole as his accomplice, so York followed up, traveling to Florida to question Toole directly. What struck York as odd was that Lucas and Toole told nearly the exact same story, without having any contact or opportunity to coordinate. Both claimed Henry shot Callie Doe with either a .38 or a .32 caliber weapon. When he questioned Otis, he wasn't sure, but despite the eerie consistency in their stories, investigators couldn't confirm any of it. There was no physical evidence to back up their claims, and the case remained open. There was another name that caught York's attention: Christopher Wilder, who abducted, violated, and murdered at least 8 women. Wilder would lure victims by posing as a photographer or talent scout, promising modeling work before attacking them. What made York look at him more closely was one of Wilder's surviving victims. She was beaten and her body dumped in Yates County, just 60 miles from where Callie Doe was found. Wilder also had a background in racing, a potential connection to the jacket that may have been given to Callie Doe by her killer before she died. York was preparing to question him, but before he got the chance, Wilder was killed in a shootout with a police officer in 1984. York was at least able to test Wilder's weapon against the bullets used in Callie's murder, but it wasn't a match. Another promising lead, another dead end. Let's shift our focus from the story a bit so that we can thank today's sponsor, Rocket Money. If you're like me and have a bit of a problem with subscriptions, whether it's for streaming services, editing tools, or coffee subscriptions, it's not uncommon to sign up for free trials and then completely forget about them. I was recently looking at my statements and didn't realize how many I was still paying for. That's where this video's sponsor, Rocket Money, comes in to help. Rocket Money is an all-in-one personal finance app that helps you manage subscriptions, lower bills, and manage your money better. It helps you get a handle on all those reoccurring charges. After connecting your bank account, the app identifies and lists all of your subscriptions in one place. From there, with just a couple of taps, Rocket Money can help cancel the ones you don't need anymore. It's a huge time saver. Another feature that's really useful is the budget tool to keep track of spending, because you know what they say, the more money you save, the more money you can spend on coffee. The app shows you where your money is going and allows you to create a customized budget. It even notifies you about upcoming charges, which can help avoid overdrafts. So if you're like me and you're looking for ways to maximize savings, Rocket Money has helped its customers save up to $740 a year when you use all the app's premium features. To save more and spend less, join the over 5 million members using Rocket Money today. Go to rocketmoney.com/brew or click the link in the description to get started for free. As the years went by, the investigation started to grow cold. Callie Doe appeared on America's Most Wanted, and flyers were circulated across the county, but it led nowhere. She was eventually laid to rest in Mount Morris Cemetery in Dansville, New York. Her gravestone read, "Lest we forget an unidentified girl, November 9th, 1979, and flights of angels sing thee to thy rest." In 1989, John York was elected sheriff of Livingston County. One of his promises to the public, this case would stay open for as long as he held office. 16 years later, in 2005, the Caledonia Jane Doe's remains were exhumed in hopes that new advancements in forensic science could finally point investigators in the right direction. Her teeth were sent for mineralogical and forensic isotope testing, which analyzes the composition of drinking water absorbed into enamel during childhood. The results revealed Callie Doe had likely grown up in the southern or southwestern part of the United States. Some DNA was also successfully extracted from her remains, something that hadn't been possible when the case first began. The science was pointing in one direction. The investigators had narrowed down her likely origin. They had DNA, they had everything, except her name. And that's when a new kind of investigation began. Not in a police station, not in a lab, but on the internet. Unidentified white female, located on November 9th, 1979 in Caledonia, Livingston County, New York. The post that started it all. 25 years after the unidentified young woman's body was found, user Richard, who by now was already a well-known member of the web sleuths community, created a thread detailing everything about the Caledonia Jane Doe case. He laid it all out: her clothing, physical features, the timeline, even the known suspects. It was a comprehensive snapshot of the investigation so far, giving other users a clear place to start, and they got to work immediately. They started by searching through every missing persons report they could find. User Merrey was the first to come across a file that showed any resemblance to the victim. They included the name and a link to the case file on a missing persons database. User Mullins responded shortly after. Not much info to go on from this one, unfortunately, but I see a resemblance. For reasons that will be revealed soon, we do not have access to the missing girl's picture. But her name was Monica Gonzalez Castillo, and she was reported missing in 1979 from Querétaro, Mexico. She was 5 feet tall, with dark auburn curly hair and light brown eyes. A user by the name Jen saw the resemblance, the curly hair, the shape of the face, but others weren't convinced. User Sharon25 pointed out, how could there be a 3-inch difference in height? User Frankenstein explained the additional discrepancies that appear when comparing it to the autopsy photo of Callie Doe's face, which we will be censoring out of respect to the victim and due to its inherently disturbing nature. It's possible, but I doubt it's the same person. Not just the height, but the shape of the face. If you compare the actual autopsy photo, not the retouched version, the shape of the face is different, and hair type seems to be different. Monica's hair is much thicker and darker. But Richard, the original poster, wouldn't let go of the Monica Castillo lead. He wrote, several things seem to match. The year is 1979 for both. The brown curly hair, indication of poor dental care and a non-US trained dentist. The southwestern jewelry, and the tanned complexion. Height and age are also close, and there is some resemblance in the photos and sketches. The match remained unconfirmed for a while, until one user informed the group that Monica Gonzalez Castillo had, in fact, been found. The reason her photo couldn't be found later in the forum nor now was simple. Thankfully, she was no longer missing. And so, with that lead closed, the sleuths carried on with their investigation, still searching for the girl in the cornfield. While some users explored potential matching missing persons, others focused on smaller details, like the jewelry Callie was wearing, hoping it could give further insight. User Smile22 zoomed in on Callie's heart-shaped key charm. After comparing it to a similar piece sold on the website Fire Mountain Gems, she noted that Callie's version appeared cheaper, likely a truck stop or gas station trinket. If that charm was sterling or real gold, the clasp would have been much nicer. Also, that clasp can be found in ordinary craft stores. User Cat K agreed on the quality and pointed out that the turquoise necklace was also fairly common across different parts of the US during the 70s. One user replied almost immediately, I had that same necklace, that same year. I'm pretty sure mine came from a mall in Northern Virginia, most likely from a chain store like The Limited. User Night Owl added that The Limited, a popular retail chain at the time, had stores in malls all across the country, reinforcing the idea that Callie could have picked up the jewelry anywhere. And finally, another user chimed in with a broader reflection. Her jewelry doesn't seem uncommon to me either. That's what people wore back then, Native American jewelry and feather clips and earrings. In the end, the theory about tracing Callie through her jewelry came to a dead end. The item she wore, once thought to be distinctive, turned out to be something ordinary, mass-produced, and sold across the country. User Jen focused more on Callie's clothing. She questioned whether the racing jacket could still be an important clue. This sparked a new theory about the kind of life Callie might have been living. Maybe she had been on the road hitchhiking, moving from place to place, unprepared for the cold that hit upstate New York in early November. Jen pointed out that if she had been on the road, the racing jacket could have easily been borrowed from someone along the way. User Two Sisters added another layer to the discussion. She noted how clean and well-groomed Callie had appeared, which didn't match the typical image of a long-term runaway. It is possible she had ran away days prior to her death and living on the streets hadn't taken a toll on her yet. Then, in the midst of their investigation, came a new development. A new tool in the investigation that's helped find some new leads. Testing determined the pollen could have come from just 4 places: Arizona, California, South Florida, or Mexico, posted user NMC2. Callie's clothing had been sent in for forensic analysis, specifically a palynological test. It's a rare technique in the US, used in fewer than a dozen criminal cases. Investigators examined pollen grains trapped in the fabric, grains that are resilient to decay and capable of revealing where someone might have traveled. That's how they determined she had most likely passed through one of 4 regions: Arizona, California, South Florida, and northern Mexico. And suddenly, the focus shifted. Sleuths began redirecting their energy toward these warmer regions, hoping the narrow geography would finally lead to something. In 2010, 5 years into the web sleuths' investigation, they got a new perspective. User Carl K., a fellow sleuth and artist, contacted the detective on the case. There were no updates or imminent leads, but the detective asked Carl what more he could do to help. Carl had a simple suggestion: release the dental charts publicly, if available. They might help someone connect the dots. Then, Carl did what he did best. He shared his own facial reconstruction of Caledonia Jane Doe, a new sketch, another chance to be recognized. And this wasn't the first time Carl Koppelman gave a face back to the forgotten. For years he'd been doing this, technically an amateur, working alone, unpaid. But his portraits stood out. He didn't just draw the dead, he gave them a presence, a spark in their eyes, a hint of who they might have been. He had quickly built a reputation, not just among fellow sleuths, but with detectives and medical examiners too. His reconstructions were that good. We actually covered one of those cases here on the channel, the woman once known only as 82483. It all began with 3 haunting words: white female bones. That's what caught the eye of Christina Skates, a genealogy student combing through old cemetery records at Cleveland State University. No identity, no description, no story. Just a case number and 3 words. Most would have stopped there, but Christina's curiosity pulled her in deeper until she uncovered a cold case buried for decades, one that might have been waiting over 40 years for someone to care enough to solve it. And her relentless search drew Carl Koppelman in. He studied the case, reviewed her skull, and created a facial reconstruction that brought her back to life. And this sketch would turn out to be one of the pivotal steps needed to solve the case. If you're interested in hearing how the story unfolds, we'll include a link to the full video in the description. But for now, just know that this is what Carl does. He doesn't just draw faces, he gives the forgotten a second chance at being found. With Carl's new sketch of Caledonia Jane Doe, the search continued. Web sleuths continued to comb through hundreds of missing person reports, hoping to find the one girl who matched Carl's sketch. User Blue Canary joined the discussion with a new possible match. I think Callie bears a strong resemblance to Angela Sigrid Ramsey. Angela was missing since 1977, was originally from Florida, one of the states mentioned in the pollen test, and was known to hitchhike. She also had friends all over the county, which would account for her ending up in New York. Carl chimed in, pointing out a subtle but important detail. In Angela's smiling photo, her side front teeth seemed to protrude further than her 2 central ones. But in Callie's post-mortem images, her front teeth appeared evenly aligned. It wasn't a definitive disqualifier, but it was a detail worth noting. Even so, Blue Canary pushed forward, reaching out directly to Major Matt Burgess at Livingston County Sheriff's Office. And to their surprise, he responded. He said that their profiles were both in CODIS, but he's going to request a manual comparison between them just to be sure nothing was missed. It's very reassuring to know that law enforcement still cares about solving this case, even considering its age. For the sleuthing community, it was encouraging, a reminder that their efforts weren't being ignored. But just a week later, Blue Canary received an update. Angela Ramsey had been officially ruled out as a match. It was disappointing, but it was one more possibility crossed off the list. But as one lead faded, another surfaced. User Bobby88 was the first to say it out loud. He saw a striking resemblance between Callie Doe and a missing girl from New Jersey, Karen Zendrosky. Then, NJ Shrink joined in, laying out the facts. Karen vanished from Bordentown, New Jersey on October 23, 1979. She was last seen at a known party spot with 2 men in their 20s. She had long brown hair, green eyes, and was last seen possibly wearing overalls. Another user chimed in. I think this is the closest physical match I've seen so far. Height, weight, age, they all lined up. Could this have been really Callie? Except the detail around her eye complicated everything. Callie's eyes were brown, Karen's were green. The user Karen7869 didn't let that stop her, insisting Karen's eyes looked hazel. User Richard stepped in and posted Karen's case file. According to it, Karen was last seen at a now closed bowling alley in Bordentown Township, just a half mile from a former wastewater treatment plant, an area long rumored to be a party spot. Police suspected that Karen might have ended up there and never left. Foul play was believed to be involved. If that was the case, then how did she end up in New York? Could law enforcement have been wrong? But if she had been from New Jersey, what about the pollen samples found on Callie's clothing and other evidence which suggested she was from Florida, Arizona, California, or Mexico? One user urged the community not to dismiss the match too quickly. I would suggest calling about Karen Zendrosky because sometimes, in my opinion, law enforcement makes mistakes about pollen evidence and things of that nature. But doubt began to creep in. Another user broke it down plainly. Callie's hair was shoulder length with a home perm and hand-frosted highlights. Karen's was long, straight, and dark. Callie had never been to a dentist, while Karen had been at least once. With that all in mind, they came to a conclusion. Who would take Karen, drive around with her alive for a month in a 200-mile radius, dress her up in boyish clothing, home perm her hair, hand frost the top, and then shoot her in the head and the back? They very much look alike, their stories just don't mesh. Callie feels like a classic runaway to me. And Karen's case, sorry to say, feels a lot like Natalie Holloway's, in that she trusted one guy, not knowing how many there would end up being. There was likely an assault, someone freaked, and her body is lying somewhere in New Jersey. As theories continued, one topic kept resurfacing. Why hadn't Callie Doe ever been matched to a missing persons report? User Mandy Oblenis stepped in with a rare insider perspective. Until last year, I was the PM admin for the Doe Network, she wrote, responding to a question about how such information was verified. It is the feeling of law enforcement, and I agree, that Callie Doe is not listed as missing within any agency we have seen online. This case has been so extensively investigated that if she were online anywhere, we would have found her by now. Her statement marked a quiet but crucial turning point. Over the years, Callie had been compared against hundreds of missing girls through California DOJ and NCIC databases. But despite all that, no match could be found. To the community, it raised an unsettling possibility. What if no one ever reported her missing? User Eliz Kelly raised a theory that hadn't been widely discussed until now. What if Callie had been deliberately forgotten? She proposed that the girl may have been in foster care, possibly in a neglectful home, and ran away. And rather than report her missing, her guardians may have stayed silent, either to avoid scrutiny, keep receiving subsidies, or simply because they didn't care. It may be that the persons most likely to recognize her picture would be the last to come forward and claim her, because her sad fate reflects their own failures. Then, nearly a decade into the forum's investigation, and 35 years since Callie's body was found in that cornfield, Carl Koppelman shared an exciting development. Bingo! I think this is Callie! Tammy Joe Alexander. That day, a new missing person profile had just gone live on the NameUs database. Carl spotted the potential match almost immediately. He shared a photo of Tammy alongside his Callie Doe sketch. The resemblance was uncanny, and others saw it too. User EmmyLove832 wrote, "Wow, this has to be her!" And another user echoed the same reaction. "This brings tears to my eyes. This poor girl is finally going to get her name back. Maybe whoever killed her will be caught. Great job, Carl K." But could they afford to be so confident? After all, they had been wrong before. But Carl didn't hesitate. He reached out to authorities, starting with the Livingston County Sheriff's Office. He attached his sketch of Callie Doe side by side with a picture of Tammy Joe Alexander. Then, he also contacted Hernando County in Florida, followed by NameUs and the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. After reviewing the information, investigators decided the potential match was promising enough to move forward. Now, all the Web Sleuths users could do was wait for DNA from Callie Doe to be tested against a DNA sample from Tammy's half-sister, Pamela Dyson, who didn't even know her sister had been missing until recently. She only found out after an old friend of Tammy's reached out to her. A year earlier, in 2014, Laurel Noel, a high school friend of Tammy's, decided to look her up online. She was curious, wondering what Tammy was up to now. But as she searched social media, there was no trace of her. What she did find, though, was an obituary for Tammy's mother, Barbara Jenkins, published back in 1998, and it listed Tammy as deceased. But something didn't sit right with Laurel. There was no death certificate, just a statement in an obituary. That wasn't enough for her to believe it. The obituary also listed Tammy's sister, Pamela Dyson, who was alive, so Laurel decided to reach out. Pamela, who had been living in Panama City at the time, hadn't lived with her sister since she was 11. They were separated when Pamela was sent to live with their grandmother. Now, 4 decades later, she started talking to relatives and realized to her surprise that no one had heard from Tammy since the late 70s. Which raised the bigger question, where did Tammy go? Pamela knew her sister had a history of running away. Originally from Brooksville, Florida, Tammy's home life had been difficult. Their mother, Barbara, struggled with addiction to prescription drugs and was prone to violent outbursts. Pamela figured Tammy might have just been trying to get away from a potentially harmful living situation. She worked as a waitress at a local truck stop, and even at just 15, she was known to ask truck drivers for rides. She rarely had trouble getting one. Everyone who knew her described her the same way: fun, adventurous, full of energy, and easy to like. That carefree spirit often led her far from home. On one occasion, Tammy and Laurel had hitchhiked all the way to California. Once they got there, Laurel called her parents, who booked both girls a flight back to Florida. But Tammy's parents hadn't seemed too concerned about where she had gone, or whether she came home at all. The last time Laurel heard from Tammy was in a letter dated May 26, 1979. Tammy mentioned plans to get married before the end of the year, and said she'd be leaving Florida by September of the following year. She ended the letter with, "I'll never forget you until the day I die." It felt like a goodbye. Laurel had always hoped that's all it was, that Tammy had simply moved on, started a new life somewhere else, and was happy. But 35 years later, and after connecting with Pamela, the two women came to a decision. It was time to file a missing person report. What surprised Pamela most was learning that no one had ever reported her sister missing. Even with their mother's erratic behavior, she knew how much their mother adored Tammy, and always assumed she would have done something. But investigators at the Hernando County Sheriff's Office confirmed there was no record, no file, no report. Pamela suspects it was because of Tammy's history of running away. She assumes authorities just didn't take it seriously. Then, on January 26, 2015, everything changed. The Livingston County Sheriff's Office held a press conference announcing what so many had hoped for, but never truly believed would actually happen. Callie Doe had been identified, and her name was Tammy Joe Alexander. Among those in attendance was former Sheriff John York, now retired, who had carried the case with him for decades. It was, as he put it, a bittersweet day. They finally knew who she was. Deep down, he said, he always believed they'd find her, and that the internet would be what the case needed to finally make it happen. For Tammy's family, it was closure, just not the kind they ever imagined. Pamela and Tammy's relatives made a decision. They wouldn't move the remains. After everything, it felt right that she stayed where she was, in Dansville, New York. On June 10, 2015, they held a service at her grave. Around 100 people came. Family, police, community members, some who had known her, most who hadn't. But they all showed up to honor the life behind the case. "I'm truly glad for the closure," Pamela said, "but it hurts to know that she died that way. It's terrible. Nobody should have to be shot and dragged out into the woods." The old headstone marked Jane Doe was taken away. In its place, a new one, with her real name. And as for the internet, it lit up with emotion. One user wrote, crying tears of happiness and sadness, "I'm so glad that Callie has her real name back." Another added, "Rest in peace, Tammy. Great job, sleuthers. You are all amazing." After all, it was all thanks to their relentless search, every photo, every theory, every post in pursuit of the truth behind Caledonia Jane Doe. And it paved the way for others too. User Neko wrote, "Do you guys realize that Callie was the start of Doe Network? She was the first Jane Doe on there. She led the way for so many others to get their names back. She led the way for so many other families to find some peace." Tammy had left a legacy behind. In life, she was full of energy and adventure. In death, she brought people together and helped others be found. The internet had solved a 35-year-long missing persons case. But even in that moment of celebration, they could feel darkness still looming. Another mystery still unsolved. One user put it simply, "She has a name. Her name was Tammy. Speak her name. Now let's find out who did this." In cases like this, revealing a victim's name can open doors. It gives investigators something to trace, places she might have been, people who might have known her. And in Tammy's case, that's exactly what happened. One of the last people to know where she had been and who she'd been with was her ex-boyfriend, Kevin Williams. He told investigators that the last time he saw her, she was staying in a condo in St. Petersburg, Florida. But when asked where it was, he couldn't remember exactly. What he did have, though, were letters and voice recordings. Tammy had sent them from a place called Rainbow Prison Ministries, based in a remote, mountainous region of Georgia. The ministry was a faith-based program, a place where former inmates, those on parole or probation, could go if they wanted to turn their lives around. Tammy left the ministry in July 1979 and sent audio tapes to Kevin, which we'll include at the end of this video. But when he listened to them, he wasn't worried. Tammy didn't sound scared. She sounded calm, hopeful. And yet, what she was doing there remains a mystery. Investigators knew very little about the ministry's inner workings. The couple who ran the ministry are now deceased. Their son, who might have known more, has also passed. One of the first theories that arose, something we touched on earlier, was that Tammy Joe Alexander had been the victim of a serial killer. If you remember, Henry Lee Lucas once claimed he had killed Tammy, but in an interview with then-Sheriff John York, it became clear Lucas was lying. He falsely identified the kind of jewelry she was wearing. Still, if the jewelry wasn't useful, maybe the racing jacket was. User Jen was among the first to question whether the jacket could still be a critical clue. The jacket may or may not be a big clue. I know that some people are like NASCAR groupies, for lack of a better word. She could have followed the circuit around the States for a while, or was following a boyfriend that was big into it. Frankenstein, you mentioned the Grand Prix was held in Watkins Glen just 2 days before the murder. I would be interested to see any media reports of that particular race, especially pictures. The theory caught fire. What if Tammy and her killer had been following the racing circuit? Sleuths combed through race photos from the Watkins Glen event, hoping to catch even a glimpse of her and her killer in the crowd. But the theory hit a wall. User Sharon25 pointed out a major timeline problem. Tammy's body was found on November 9th. The Watkins Glen Grand Prix had taken place a full month earlier, on October 7th. But what if just the murderer had a connection to racing? One of the more prominent suspects had been Christopher Wilder, due to his ties of racing and the assumption that he might have been in the state of New York at the time of the murder. But user Tracy came forward with an update. The information on Christopher Wilder not being in NY in November of 1979 is from researching his locations and crimes. As far as I can tell, he was in Florida at the time. He did travel frequently for racing, but all racing in Western New York was done for the season several weeks before her death. Another user, Munkle Up, backed this up, adding that based on everything known about Wilder, he had been living in South Florida, and anything else would just be speculation. Still, other users wouldn't let go of the racing theory. User He Winked at Me introduced another known serial killer to the discussion, William Bradford. It also says that Bradford picked up some of his victims at race events. Okay, now I'm getting real suspicious. Yet I haven't seen him named as a suspect anywhere. If he hasn't been questioning Callie's death, he should be. But as the racing theory lost traction and the timeline fell apart, a different kind of suspicion started to take shape, one that didn't involve serial killers at all. One user wrote, "A shot to the head seems kind of odd for a serial killer to do. It was almost like she either didn't think he was going to pull the trigger. This doesn't seem like a random killing, like something a serial killer would do." It painted a different picture, not a thrill-seeking predator, but maybe someone Tammy didn't trust. But Carl Koppelman added, "I don't think she knew her killer. She wouldn't have been catching rides at a truck stop if she knew her killer." The user Ezio McTavish pulled the focus back to the FBI's original composite sketch. So, the guy that she was with was heavy-set, about 25 to 30 years old like the FBI information, dark hair, 5'9", wireframe glasses. Can anyone think of any serial killers that match? Carl K. replied quickly, "I can't think of any convicted serial killers who fit that description." The sketch in question came from the waitress at the Lima Diner, the last known person to see Tammy alive. So if Tammy was with someone who didn't match any known repeat offender, was it possible she wasn't killed by a serial killer at all? Some users began floating another theory. What if she'd been picked up by a trucker? User WebRocket leaned in that direction. They speculated maybe Tammy had gotten a ride with a long-haul driver who, for whatever reason, thought she was going to be a problem and then killed her. User Harmony2 had a similar take. I was also thinking along the lines of her running away and then being picked up by her killer. But there was one key detail from the waitress's statement. She didn't see any truck. So if Tammy was hitchhiking, the man she was with likely wasn't a trucker. What the waitress did say was that they looked friendly. There was no sign of distress, which is why some began to wonder, did Tammy know her killer after all? User Terrible Thing began building a profile of Tammy's killer. What troubled them most were the crime scene details. No sign of a struggle, pockets turned out, a clean execution-style murder, one shot to the head, another for certainty. If Tammy knew her killer, maybe she trusted him enough to follow him into the cornfield willingly. But if she didn't, what could he have said to get her out there without a fight? But the bigger question was, if she had known her killer, what could a teenage girl possibly have known that was worth killing her over? The user Still Seek Answers was focused on the man at the diner. There was nothing odd noted at the diner when she had dinner. The waitress had the impression the man with her was her brother, so that makes one think she was comfortable and at ease with him. Yet a short time later, she was laying dead in a cornfield. User Dr. D. Mike wrote, "I had always believed that it was a family member or loved one that killed her, hence the absence of any identification." And Carbuff agreed. It would make it more likely that she had never been reported missing. Her killer wouldn't want that information to come out. Other users focused on the way she died. User Ezio McTavish speculated that the manner in which Tammy was killed, a clean execution-style gunshot to the head, raised more questions than answers. But this user proposed that there may have been an argument. Her body had not been touched. No signs of assault or struggle. To them, it felt like a moment of panic, a confrontation that escalated fast. And by the way she was left out there, it seemed like her killer had panicked and fled. Other users wondered if there had been something deeper between Tammy and her killer. A romantic relationship gone wrong, maybe. But in the end, none of the theories could bring a definitive answer. The sleuths had done all they could, and now it was the police's turn to take the case further. In 2016, investigators announced a major update. They had recovered a male DNA sample from evidence collected at the crime scene. It was compared against 3 persons of interest, including Tammy's ex-boyfriend Kevin. However, the results came back negative. No matches could be found. Today, there's a powerful new tool that could change everything: genetic genealogy. In some of our past videos, which we will link in the description below for those of you interested, we've talked about genetic genealogists such as Eric Schubert, Cece Moore, and Colleen Fitzpatrick before on this channel, and how their groundbreaking work has solved a number of decades-old mysteries. Their process is as fascinating as it is effective. Using autosomal DNA, they build intricate family trees for the unidentified DNA. By analyzing shared genetic markers and cross-referencing them with public databases, they can narrow down a suspect's identity to a single family, and often a single individual. Perhaps if the same method was applied to the DNA sample recovered in Tammy Joe's case, it could finally reveal the person responsible for her death. Could genetic genealogy be the final breakthrough the murder has been waiting for? Only time will tell. Tammy Joe is no longer a Jane Doe. After 36 years, thanks to the efforts of strangers on the internet who refuse to give up on her, her missing persons case and the mystery of her name have been solved. Her story has been told, yet the final chapter is still missing. Tammy Joe's murder case is active, and anyone who has any information that could help the investigation is encouraged to call the Livingston County Sheriff's Office tip line at 585-243-7100. or the FBI Buffalo Field Office at 716-856-7800. Tammy was just a child. She had dreams, a voice, and a life that was stolen far too soon. Her voice deserves to be heard. Thank you for watching the video, and thanks to Rocket Money for making this episode possible. If you'd like to support the time and research that went into making it, consider hitting the like button, subscribing to the channel, and watching one of our other videos that we put on the screen.
Hi Kevin, how you doing? I'm fine. That was nice to hear from you. I'm very glad to get your letter. I gotta go now. See